Chapter 567, Council Summit. Greetings, esteemed otherworlders. Conrad stood to his feet and moved towards the edge of the barricaded platform, so he could get as close to the four who stood before him. He had a bright smile on his face, and as his blonde hair swayed, his neatly trimmed beard seemed to twitch slightly. His eyes reflected joy, relief at the presence of the otherworlders, especially the one who was the center of attention. "We welcome you to our summit," he continued, ensuring his tone was both audacious and respectful. Going as far as bowing his head before them, he concluded his opening greeting. "Thank you for coming." Vita was also standing in front of her seat, and she followed his cue and bowed the moment he did so. Once the other nobles saw this, they knew they had to follow suit. Arrogant fools. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Conrad sighed, nearly shaking his head as he spotted many among the nobles who displayed reluctance when lowering their heads. Still, incompetent ones like them have their uses. Sadly, the alliance still had much use for the contributions of nobles, hence the reason why the entire system hadn't yet been abolished. It was a way to incentivize rich and powerful people to contribute to the alliance's cause. That way, even merchants could become nobles if they paid the appropriate price. We expended a lot of resources on the rebuilding and compensation efforts, so their influence is needed now more than ever. Conrad took in a deep breath, letting his thoughts sink in. Thanks to their growing importance, they even had the gall to refuse coming to the capital despite the council inviting them. They gave several excuses, but Conrad knew the primary reason was due to their safety. The capital has been attacked by dragons twice now. They didn't want to take the risk, so they were going to remain in the south. Normally, Conrad would have threatened to strip them of their noble status for refusing a direct invitation, acting treasonously against the alliance. But the current circumstances couldn't allow such a brash action. For one, their fears aren't particularly unfounded. The safety of the capital is indeed questionable. Plus, with their resources being relevant to us now more than ever, it's not really a decision I'm willing to make so hastily. The invitation was merely to commemorate the nearly complete reconstruction of the capital, after all. It was a monumental occasion, after all, considering how quickly they were able to move. But, I suppose it's not important enough for them to risk their lives over. Despite their refusal to come, here they were, at least 90% of them were present, and the remaining 10% had sent messages prior to the summit that they were simply delayed. But were on their way. From the way things looked, the Capital Recovery Gala would have full attendance of all the influential figures in the alliance, nobles included. I am still unsure why they had a sudden change of heart, but this is good. Conrad thought to himself, slowly raising his head. This was the first time the otherworlders would be meeting the nobles, and the same also applied vice versa. There were a lot of things that could happen as a result of this interaction, but it all depended on the reaction of the otherworlders. Now then. I can only pray for the best of results. Conrad thought to himself, waiting for a response from the parties he just addressed. What's with the formality, Conrad? Ray suddenly said with an audacious voice. I thought we were already past that. Huh? Ray, you. Conrad's eyes widened the moment he heard the response from the most important figure among the otherworlders at the moment. I would have gone to see him yesterday, but Vita and I were too swamped dealing with all of these nobles, and time passed before we both realized it. He hadn't had proper sleep for so long now, and the only reason he looked so fresh was due to magic. He had to look his best in such a gathering, and it was the same for Vita. It was the least they could do. After all, they were very useless when it came to actually protecting the capital or the entire alliance. The council is no better than the nobles who hide away in the south. While calamity befell the capital, we were tucked away into the secret bunker underground. Since their only use was the administrative affairs and decisions regarding the United Human Alliance, they had to perform their duties to the maximum. If that meant groveling before their saviors, he would gladly do that. There was no room in his heart to be angry at Ray for hiding his power, considering how much help he had rendered to the Alliance on a much larger scale. And that servant of his as well. Attitude aside, he's beyond phenomenal in his execution. It was only due to Ader that they were able to make so much progress in barely 3 months. His power and insight were otherworldly, to say the least. The rest of the otherworlders helped too. Instead of giving up on saving the humans and simply saving their own skin, they all decided to double down and work harder for the sake of helping the Alliance. I still have no idea what got into the hero, or where he went, but I believe he is also doing what he can for us. Despite them losing members of their group, their resolve was much stronger than ever. Honestly, they are more than deserving of all respect and honor. These were Conrad's thoughts, so it caught him by surprise when Ray suddenly acted so familiar with him despite having no reason to. That said, Conrad was not oblivious to his intentions. As such, he decided to play along. Well, I need to thank you for your services, do I not? He responded, trying his hardest to sound as casual as possible. You know that isn't needed between the two of us. It seems you're doing well, though. You too, Vita. You both look great despite the amount of stress you must be under. Conrad and Vita chuckled, staring at each other while exchanging meaningful glances. They both understood what Ray was trying to do. Thanks, Ray. You also look pretty neat. Of course. I've been asleep for so long, it's only to be expected. Ray replied with a casual smile. You seem to have grown taller too. I almost didn't recognize you. Haha. I've been getting that a lot. It was Ray's turn to chuckle, now taking an extra step forward. Still, I must say. It's good to be back. Thank you for this, Ray. Conrad's eyes beamed with gratitude as he looked at the boy's charismatic approach to their introduction. The nobles might have their own hidden intentions and agendas, but now that they've seen the very man who single-handedly killed such a disaster being so casual with us, their regard for the otherworlders will also extend to us. Conrad had his sources who told him of a group of nobles who had already gotten their hands on people who claimed to be otherworlders. That wasn't impossible to consider, since there still had to be a bunch of them roaming the land. Their goals for gathering them must be to have some leverage against us as the Royal Council. Most likely, they would also try to bring Ray and the rest of the otherworlders present to their side. But now, thanks to Ray's performance, the chances of that were very unlikely. He really is the amazing person I remember. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. It seems, no matter the era and situation, human nature remains the same. Chapter 568, Council Summit. Well, I never thought this would happen so soon, but I suppose life has many surprises. That was Ray's initial thought when he observed certain individuals in the Royal Council Hall. He had been observing the additional security, even seeing General Lucy present in the hall. The last time I saw her was right before the dark gathering. As always, her face was stern and her expression unchanging. Ray thought it was a little funny because they both had eye patches. I could get some tips from her. It was while he was having these thoughts that he sensed a different kind of resonance from a few members of the security personnel within the room. Since the nobles brought their own security officers to keep them safe, it wasn't a surprise to see the massive hall chock full of guards, private and public. Among these were 4 individuals in particular who were impossible to ignore. Not only were they positioned very close to each other, also adorned with luxurious enchanted items, but they also had their faces covered in some way. One was a warrior, so he had a helmet atop his head. One was a mage, and so a hood obscured their facade. The third seemed to be some kind of assassin, and he simply had a partial mask, one made of bandage-like clothes, cover the lower portion of his face. As for the fourth, he seemed like the leader, and he was dressed in quite the spectacular fashion, a dark trench coat, with layers of gold decorating it in many areas. He also had a full mask that covered his face. What intrigued Ray about these 4 wasn't particularly their outfits, but the vibe he got from them. After he awakened, his senses improved drastically. Even without focusing on light or dark mode, he could still perceive many things that he previously wouldn't. And so, in order to justify his interest in the 4, he used his perfect divine appraisal. That was when he saw the keywords otherworlder. I see. Once he noticed that, he began to piece a few things together. By analyzing their additional information, as well as their classes, while also using his own brain to fill in a few holes, he was able to tie up the links pretty quickly. Looks like my old classmates are working for the Alliance's nobles now. Ray smiled internally. He still couldn't guess how many of them were operating this way, or the precise reasons why they individually chose to be subject to the snob nobles, but he could pretty much guess the latter. I suspect they traveled to the south and garnered the favor of the nobles due to their relative strength compared to the people of this world. Since they also had secrets of the Alliance, and they know about the rest of the otherworlders, they would also have an edge. That made them indispensable assets to the nobles who employed them. At least they're not slaves. That's good. Ray found himself slightly shrugging. It's possible that the nobles got information about the rest of my classmates and will want to bring more of us to their side. He had dealt with enough humans, both scummy and righteous, to know how their minds worked. Still, he couldn't help but laugh internally. I'm sure they're feeling slightly mortified right about now. The guy they wrote off as the weakest of the group is now recognized as the strongest. Haha, I have to see the looks on their faces. By using dark mode, he could see past any obstacle, though only the outlines of everything would be seen. In essence, a realm of black and white where he could perceive all. Upon closing his eyes and looking at them one more time, he was pleased to find shocked expressions on their respective faces. He also recognized them quite well despite their obvious attempts to use illusions on him. None of those worked on him, so he was able to see them as they were. Byron, Levia, Devin, and Caden. He recognized them well. After all, they were often associated with Adam as part of his clique before the latter passed away. There should be one more. I wonder where Felicia is. Perhaps she didn't make it, or she was somewhere else. Either way, it was quite pleasant to see his old classmates now stunned by his rise to power. It felt a bit immature, but Ray reveled in it. The system doesn't block happiness, so I suppose it's safe to revel in my satisfaction. He finally opened his eyes after closing them for so long. Well, in his perspective it had been too long, but in actuality, barely any time had passed. He could think very quickly and act in the same regard. As a result, all of these actions were done by him in a split second. Well, I am curious about their adventures and the plans they have, if they have any, but for now, I better give them a show. He grinned, almost devilishly, looking at Conrad, who was finally raising his head after greeting him and his friends. Looks like I'll have to replace Adonis as the leader here, considering the fact that I'm the strongest. Ray already learned quite a bit from Adonis after watching him address the Royal Council and his fellow students for quite some time, So he didn't think he would have a problem replicating that magic. Plus, by regulating his emotions and being perfectly in sync with his thoughts, he wouldn't have to stutter or miss a beat when passing his message across. He simply stepped up, his face radiating the very confidence he wanted to emulate, and his lips parted to bring forth the kind of words he desired. "What's with the formality, Conrad? I thought we were already past that." Saying something like this, Ray noticed the surprise on the faces of his old classmates grew, and that just caused him to grow even more satisfied. Still. That was only one reason why he decided to take such a radical approach. Conrad looks surprised too, but I'm sure he'll get it quickly. What I'm trying to do. Ray didn't know or particularly like any of the nobles, but he trusted Conrad and Vita to an extent. He knew them, both SS Relix and Ray, and they were honest people who desired to help the Alliance. At least for the most part. No one is perfect, but they're as ideal as they come. It looks like, with the presence of my old classmates, and the tension currently permeating the political landscape, there could be some sort of power struggle brewing. Ray thought internally. To prevent any unnecessary conflict, it's better we, as otherworlders here, take a clear stance in support of the Royal Council. That way, whatever ambitions the nobles had for the capital and the Alliance in general would be completely paused. At least, until he figured out what exactly was going on. I would like to avoid taking any lives, if possible. Ray sighed internally, now waiting for Conrad's response to his words. Let's hope they take the hint and back off. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Just letting you all know in advance. Chapter 569, Council Summit. The meeting didn't take very long. After their greetings, and a few casual conversations between Ray and the council members, the rest of the otherworlders also joined in on the conversation. They followed Ray's lead and acted very familiar with the higher UPS. This did two things for both sides. One was establishing the position of the otherworlders, associating them with the highest position of power in the United Human Alliance. In essence, they weren't just lackeys, but actual partners with the Royal Council. The second, and perhaps more crucial thing, was making it so the Royal Council had a deep bond with the otherworlders. Hence warding off any scavengers who desired to poach any of them to the other side. Plus, since it was possible that the nobles were beginning to act very cocky and more entitled due to having otherworlders on their side, by presenting otherworlders on the side of the Royal Council, it would serve to caution them. When comparing quality, it was clear who had the superior allies. Hence, it was even possible for the opposite to happen, at least, in the mind of the nobles. Their otherworlder employees could end up switching to the other side as a result of the temptation. That alone made the move brilliant. If the nobles were smart enough, they would quickly recognize this and back off as soon as possible. That was the rationale of both Ray and Conrad. On that note, the meeting ended with the presentation of the otherworlders to the nobles, and vice versa. It was clear that its purpose was more of an exhibition, and also a formal recognition of the heroes of humanity. Once it was over, the otherworlders were dismissed, and this time Brutus was the one who escorted them back to their residence. Window.pubfuturatag equals window.pubfuturatag. Window.pubfuturatag.push Lucille stayed back with Conrad and Vita to deliver a supplementary address to the nobles present. Whatever else was discussed there was anyone's guess. Thank you, Ray. No, all of you. Brutus bowed his head the moment they entered the otherworldler's residence. He remained at the entrance, and while everyone was excitedly proceeding in, either relaxing on the parlor's couch, or opting for the comfort of their rooms. Those words of gratitude made them all look in the head warrior's direction. "You all have my gratitude." He re-emphasized his position before raising his head before the young ones. "Stop overreacting, Brutus." Justin laughed. "We didn't even do anything. Just showed up and went with whatever Ray had going on." Brutus didn't know whether Justin was truly oblivious of the significance of what Ray did, or he was just playing dumb on purpose, but hearing what he said only made the warrior smile even further. "Right now, there are a lot of internal problems within the alliance. It is none of your concern, of course, but your presence in that meeting has helped support the cause of the Royal Council." Once Brutus spoke these things, the students got a bit of perspective on what was going on behind the scenes. Still, one student in particular wasn't satisfied. "Why can't the Royal Council just get rid of those guys? They have the most power in the alliance both politically and in terms of force." The only blonde girl among them asked. "If they're getting in the way, why not eliminate them thoroughly?" Once everyone heard this, their eyes widened in surprise as they looked at her with shocked faces. Belle was the cutest thing in the room, yet the vile words that proceeded from her lips completely betrayed her appearance. It seemed she recognized this very quickly, as she swiftly began to rephrase her words so they would be more palatable. Window.pubfuturatag equals window.pubfuturatag, window.pubfuturatag.push w. What I meant was, like, strip them of power and stuff. Like, if they are a threat to the kingdom, cut them off. From power, I mean. Ultimately, allocation should belong to the alliance, right? They can just destroy. I mean, sever the nobles from the wealth that makes them so influential, to begin with. Right? Right. Her panicked face leaked a bead of sweat or two, and the constant gaze of everyone around her made her nearly shriek under pressure. Thankfully, it seemed her cute side won and everyone managed to buy her bumbling excuse for proper context. "Yeah. I was wondering about that too," Clark added. "Those nobles seem to be doing more harm than good. If it's resources the alliance needs, they can just tax them harder or forcibly take the resources they need for the betterment of everyone. We are in a time of war, after all. The rich weren't particularly bothered in this world, especially if they paid their dues, but nobles had some responsibility to render. If they proved to be overbearing, stripping them of their title was ideal. Plus, since the council had ultimate political power, the loyalty of the nation's strongest, and 5 other worlders who were readily on their side, they could find a way to obtain the resources they required without needing to buckle to the pressure of the nobles. So why? Why were Conrad and Vita tolerating these people? Firstly, things aren't as simple as your words make them seem. Actions like those cascade down and cause consequences that would be difficult to contain, even by the Royal Council. Brutus began, but then he offered a deeper sigh. Unfortunately, even if we were willing to take the risk, there's also the second restriction. Everyone waited silently, watching as keenly as possible, to listen to the troubling reason that caused the head warrior to display signs of distress. Before the establishment of the United Human Alliance, there was a binding vow made among the councillors and the aristocrats of the time, which preserved their lives and resources if they were to ever agree to the agreement. The only reason for the termination of this agreement would be if they were found doing something borderline illegal, that is, against the outlined laws of the land as documented in the Royal Wriths. So far, the nobles had done no such thing, at least, not to the knowledge of the council. Window.pubfuturatag equals window.pubfuturatag. Window.pubfuturatag.push, unit, 6636335F7442F0652B33, ID. PF 8817-1, they are an obnoxious bunch, yes, but the binding vow prevents us from taking any radical action against them, or any new noble faction that forms afterward. What served as a show of trust among nations willing to band together for the common benefit of mankind had now grown to become a burden. What happens when the Royal Council breaks this binding vow? Ray finally spoke up, causing attention to shift to him for a moment. He had been standing right in front of his room's door, but now he drew closer to the rest. His arms were folded as he finally halted his approach. Staring at Brutus with a serious demeanor, he waited for a response. A curse will be activated. I see. So the Grand Master and Counselor's life could be in danger if they break the vow. I doubt it's that simple. Ray interrupted Clark as he turned back to Brutus. Those two wouldn't risk the entire alliance just to preserve their lives. Once Brutus heard this, his expression darkened. There's something else, isn't there? Ray's gaze, coupled with his serious demeanor, made it clear just how badly he wanted to know what was going on. Tell us. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Who's going to lay out their theories or thoughts before the Chapter 570, Binding Vow? You. Releasing visible breaths from his pursed lips as he sighed, Ray dropped the book he just finished reading on his desk as he rose from the chair where he sat. It's been months since I last read, but it takes me a few minutes to finish a whole book now. And that's even when I'm being slow. He proceeded to his bed and collapsed on it, covering his face with his hand. How am I supposed to read with Alicia if I'm just faster than her by such a degree? Ray knew his worries were misplaced. Rather than agonizing about these thoughts, he ought to think about ways to lift her curse first. Curse, huh? Who would have thought it would become such a troublesome thing? Closing his eyes, he remembered what Brutus told him and his classmates earlier that day. The brutal consequence for breaking the binding vow. A curse befalling all of the Alliance. Is something of that scale even possible by humans? There were millions of humans living in the Western continent. It was difficult to estimate their numbers, due to many factors, but based on the last recorded census, and the events that Ray just caught up on after reading a few books just now, he placed the number at 5 to 6 million. The capital itself houses over 100,000 people. Some regions have a higher population, and recently the South has been saturated with higher numbers than before. From what Brutus said, this curse would be inflicted randomly on the people of the Alliance. Ray didn't know the details of what that meant, and it seemed Brutus was also unsure of it. Could it be that less than the total number of people in the Alliance will be affected, but those chosen will be random, or maybe everyone will be affected? He wasn't even sure if he and his classmates as otherworlders would be targeted by this curse or not. I know I'm safe from it, but what of the others? It seemed like a careless deal to be made over some unity between nations. Especially since it had to do with wagering the lives of unsuspecting people. Those were desperate times, so I can see how it might have seemed like a good deal back then. After all, the Royal Council had to unanimously act, using the resources of the Alliance at their disposal, before the binding vow could be broken. This wasn't an easy thing to do, so as long as one person in the group wasn't stupid, everyone was safe. Besides, even fools valued their lives, so they weren't going to take any action that put their lives at risk. All in all, the entirety of humanity under the Alliance was being held hostage by the binding vow, and most didn't know it existed at all. I guess this is what happens when you give someone the power to rule over you. The major issue on Ray's mind when all of these questions were asked was this. How in the world were you able to make such a deal? Apparently, it was due to a device similar to the Oculus which was able to record and enforce binding vows with a curse. I guess it sort of tallies with what Ader told me. Even humans can bring about powerful curses in this world if the consequence is that significant. The world was the one who delivered the curse, so it would be pretty much irreversible by Ray with his healing magic. I really need to get a skill that deals with this stuff. But, he didn't even know where to begin when it came to that search. At this point, Ray felt very blind and confused on what path to take. I thought the enchanted item that Brutus mentioned could help me, but apparently in order to preserve the vow it was divided into various parts and split among the biggest factions at the time. The one that was in the royal council's possession existed within the treasury, but there was no real way to determine where the others were not without breaking the vow itself. Technically, the curse won't be activated if an agent of the royal council acts in the same way prohibited by the vow, or maybe even a third party. The best option presented before him was to look for all the pieces by himself and see if they could stop the curse of the vow, while also hoping it led to some clues or preferably some kind of skill that would save Alicia. All of this is operating on some heavy presupposition and assumptions, but it's my only clue at the moment. According to what Brutus told him, there were 7 pieces in total, 1 in the custody of the royal council while the others were split among the most powerful nobles in the alliance. Finding them should take a while, but... Whoosh! A dark silhouette formed close to Ray's door, causing the boy to sit upright in order to see who was making their entry into his room. He instantly knew as soon as he sensed the presence. "Ader, where have you been?" Ray asked, a slight smile tugging at his lips the moment he watched the man in black suit emerge from the dissipating darkness. Ader's red hair danced as he smiled at Ray, swiftly making a slight bow upon entry. "Just running an errand or two. I thought a little about a current problem, so I had to go fetch a few things." "A few things?" Ray raised an eyebrow. Right before his eyes, 6 shards pieces of a construct of some sort appeared right in front of Ader. "No way. Is that?" They floated before the familiar, resonating with each other while being shrouded by some form of darkness. Ader raised his hand, and a final piece appeared atop it like a core of some sort, which gleamed with dark purple. "This is the Dybbuk. Apparently, there was a time when..." "Ah, from that look on your face it seems you already know what it is." Ader stopped midway through explanation and made a grander smile. "As expected of my master." How did you get all of those?" "They're supposed to be with various factions." "Ah, so you already know that much." "Indeed, and they were kept in quite obscure and precocious locations. It took me all day to gather all of them, after which I went to the treasury to obtain the final piece." "All day? This is barely evening, though." "I hope you aren't upset I acted in such a manner, especially breaking into the treasury, master." "I was just following your order regarding the well-being of these people, which you left in my care." Ray could feel all sorts of emotions rush through his body, but he did his best to suppress them. "No, not at all." He laughed a little. "You did well." "Really? That's perfect, then. I thought we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone with this item." "2 birds? Is he thinking about the same thing I was considering with Alicia? If Ader also has the same idea, it must be legit." Ray could feel excitement bubble up within him. "Firstly, we'll get rid of that annoying binding vow of the royal council. Then..." Just as Ray expected, Ader had thought ahead this entire time. But, what about the second? Ray already knew what it would be. It was: "We'll finally be able to bind your absolute beast and make it a loyal slave." Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Well, make your guesses, everyone. Which familiar is Ray getting this time? Chapter 571, The Plan for Submission. Ray no longer had any, or skill at his disposal, so it would be very difficult to get a summon under his control. Using summoning magic and controlling the summons was still within his power, especially elementals, but beasts were completely different. Beasts came from another world, and unlike monsters who had flesh as their bodies and mana cores as hearts, or elementals who were primarily composed of natural elemental attributes and had some kind of core that functioned as a stabilizer, the beasts were fully composed of mana, flesh, core, and all. They might seem like physical bodies, but ultimately they were simply mana given form. Casting magic to control them wouldn't work at all. I guess this is where the difference between skills and magic come into play once again. Ray chuckled as he heard Ader's explanation. Precisely. With skills that specifically allow control, as long as the action fell under the purview of the tier, there really was no limit. But, with Ray losing the perks of having control skills, he could only use magic to achieve that end. And, as established already, controlling beasts through magic was quite impossible. If I'm to guess, the laws of this world just differ from the one they're coming from. As such, the kind of control magic that can be made using the magic of this world would prove ineffective on them. Ray rubbed his chin as he analyzed the situation. Ader shrugged and gave a casual smile. Those details are unnecessary, Master. The good news is that we have a nice alternative. Ader once again caused Ray's attention to fall on the shards of the audiobook. They were slowly closing in on one another, though Ader still had the core in his hands. How exactly do we go about it? It's an item for cursing and establishing binding vows, right? Ray asked this partly because he was curious about how he would control his new familiar, but also because he wanted to see if the audiobook's function would enable him to somehow bring Alicia back. Ader hadn't mentioned the possibility yet, but Ray didn't want to give up hope just yet. It's simple. We force the creature to enter a binding vow with you, so it will be enforced by this item. Once it is done, a curse will be inflicted on the two of you. Fortunately for you, Master, you are immune to curses, so you aren't bound to your agreement. But the beast will be bound to theirs. Ader, you're a genius. Ray's eyes widened as he nearly jumped to his feet with a brilliant smile. Master, you are too kind. This is just basic logic. Ader shook his head, almost as if he didn't want the compliment, but the way he squirmed after hearing Ray's praise made it clear that he enjoyed it. He probably even wanted more. Okay. May I continue, then? Yes. Go on, Ader. Ray said, now excitedly waiting for Ader to unpack everything he had planned for the process. The brief summary of it was thus. Ray and Ader would have to move to a relatively remote location, where the beast's summon would be brought out. The former and the beast would enter the binding vow right there and then. Prior to that, though, Ray would have set up a special barrier as a magic circle where the beast was to appear, so it wouldn't be able to escape or attack him or anyone. Once the binding vow was complete, Ray would reveal his immunity to the familiar and establish dominance over it. The familiar would be tempted to also break the agreement, but would learn the hard way that it isn't possible. Plus, with Ray and Ader being stronger than the beast summoned, they could also bully it and subject it into further servitude if it decided to be stubborn. Isn't that a bit extreme? Ray found himself laughing with slight discomfort as he went over the plan with Ader. Any fool who doesn't see Master's great ought to be beaten over and over again until the truth sinks into their mind. Once Ray heard this, he couldn't argue any further. I still have no idea why Ader sees me in such high regard, but it's best I leave things like this. I mean, there's a lot I don't know about him. But it seems there's a lot he doesn't know about himself either. When Ray reasoned about things that way, he had a certain train of thought. Could the same apply to me? Perhaps, hidden within him, was a part of himself that he didn't know about. So, are you ready for the binding vow with your beast, master? Ader's voice interrupted Ray's thought, so he suspended it for the moment. Instead, he gave Ader a probing smile and chuckled lightly. I thought you didn't want me getting another familiar. Are you finally admitting that I need another servant apart from you? For a moment, Ader said nothing. He looked a bit serious as he stared at Ray. A complicated mix of surprise and slight hesitation, mixed with other things, roamed all over his demeanor. Then, while I am of the stance that my competence will far exceed any familiar you would summon, I also have to admit that I most likely won't always be by your side. Ader. There are a lot of things in the works at the moment. In order to properly secure your protection, meat shields that can hold the fort until my arrival are necessary. That is why I consider this familiar necessary. It will be a waste not to use something as rare and interesting as the beast in question. Ader's smile was charming, and it oozed concern for his master. But that wasn't all that Ray saw. To think I was already thinking he would get along with the new familiar. He only considers it as a meat shield. In Ader's eyes, he would always be the only legitimate familiar for Ray. Whether or not the boy agreed with that or not was worth deliberation. Besides, I personally desire to test out this audiobook and see its effects with my very eyes. I still need to hold off on removing the curse on the Alliance until certain conditions are met, which means this is the only viable option at the moment. I see. Ray leaked out an amused smile as he rose to his feet. As expected of Ader, there always had to be some sort of caveat, certain hidden intentions behind his every move. This quality of his still scared Ray, even though he was the master. So, do you have any place in mind? Ader asked, referring to where they would perform the entire operation. Despite the question being so sudden, Ray already had a place in mind. The Grand Calamity class dungeon. Within a moment, space around him and Ader warped, transporting them to the dreary hall that was the dungeon's ground floor. The overwhelmingly large expanse greeted them, and they both looked around, as if staring back. This place would be really good as a fortress. Ader murmured, to which Ray's eyes beamed in response. Seems I wasn't the only one who thought about it. With the two being settled, and the preparations underway, a certain thought suddenly struck Ray. I no longer have my inventory skill, so how exactly am I going to get the familiar? Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. I'm sure some of you wondered about this too. Well, the question will soon be answered. Chapter 572, A Slight Hiccup. A skill was essentially something one earned, or it came as a privilege from the world. In both cases, they represented a special ability that a person possessed. Usually, skills were meant to evolve, not disappear from a person. Since skills were an intrinsic part of a person, especially those earned, they were a permanent addition to the individual. Skills, in a sense, could not be created nor destroyed. But Ray was an exception. By using, he essentially bent the rules a little. He broke down skills and used them to mold new ones, or more advanced versions of one. This, in a way, was still following the rules, but teetering on the edge. However, the complete breaker was, which caused the permanent loss of skills, changing them to stat points. In this case, the nature of the skill was changed into another kind of power stats. It was possible that skill essence could be lost in the process, but ultimately, skills would be converted to something else, never fully destroyed in a sense. Still, according to the rules of the world, Ray could no longer use any of the skills he had fed to sacrifice. He also couldn't use the skills that were combined using to make his current skill set. TCH. This sucks. Once again, Ray found himself listening to Ader's lectures as they discussed the current problem. All of this started when Ray asked Ader about what happened to his inventory, going further to explain the whole and bit. The short version of Ader's answer was, "Your inventory and everything inside it is gone forever." In essence, all of Ray's money, resources, and everything that he had kept within that space were completely lost to him. It was beyond devastating to hear. The more time passes, the more I realize just what I've lost by giving up all those skills of mine. He had taken so many things for granted, as they were just a part of his life, but now he was beginning to understand their significance. I can't even fly unless I use magic or change the physical properties of my body somehow. Flying used to be so natural to him, so looking at the slight difference in this one skill, and applying it to a lot of others, showed just how frustrating all of this was for Ray. Your power. It prevents you from copying the same skill from a target twice, am I correct? Ader asked, staring at Ray's anguished face. Yeah. How did you know? I could tell. If you could indeed copy skills from anyone an infinite amount of times, your problems wouldn't be that difficult to remedy. True. HAAA. Ray heaved a sigh as he sat on the dark dungeon floor. One of the first things he tried after getting merger was to see if he could combine two or multiple to develop an incredibly OP skill. If he could combine a lot of SS tier skills, he figured it was possible to create an SSS tier skill. Not only that, but he could easily sacrifice multiple skills to create powerful variants of skills, especially since he could always copy them from his classmates and those around him over and over again. But it's the same way I can't copy my own skills from myself. I can't copy the same skill from someone I already copied from. In essence, if two people had the skill, he could copy the skill only once per person. Hence, he would have two skills. However, he couldn't ever repeat the process on either of them. If a third person with the same skill came about, he could copy from them and get three skills. That was what Ray understood about his power, hence, its limitations. I reckon is a lot graver than that, though. Based on the terms, I won't ever be able to use the skill I sacrifice. That probably means I might never be able to copy it. There was no way Ray could know for sure, since he would need to find a new target who had at least one of the exact skills he sacrificed and see if he could use on the skill. If I can no longer use those skills, then I really fumbled with the immortality and resistance skills. Damn it. What was I thinking? Before Ray could allow his frustration to get the better of him, he calmed himself. Once he let his thoughts simmer a little, he gave a big sigh and rose to his feet. As he dusted his butt, despite there being no real need to, he prepared spatial magic. Let's leave then. There's no use sticking around here. Ray would be lying if he said he wasn't disappointed. He managed to lose all three of his beast summons, with no prospect of ever getting them back. The skill to use them was also incredibly rare and exclusive skill that belonged to Alicia. It was practically impossible for anyone in this world to have anything like it. Seems I'm stuck with only Ader. It's not a bad deal, but I wanted more. Why are we leaving, Master? What about the binding vow? Don't you want to tame your new familiar? Ray raised an eyebrow and stared at Ader's confused face. It was a surprise to see that the usually sharp and competent guy didn't take the hint this time around. We can't do that anymore. Oh? Why? We can't do that anymore. Oh? Why? I mean, I kept the purple egg in my inventory, remember. All the items inside are gone, so it's pretty much lost to me forever. Ray felt a little annoyed that he had to explain all of this to Ader. It felt like he was opening fresh wounds. Just take the hint already. He wanted to scream internally, but he was stopped by his emotion control, and also by Ader's amused reaction to his words. Oh, that. Ader stretched out his hand, and a purple egg appeared right on top of his hand, with darkness coating the surface. Ray's eyes nearly popped in shock. He couldn't believe his eyes. How do you have that? He yelled out, nearly losing his composure. His emotions even reached the threshold, so the system had to forcibly suppress them. It seemed he still had a lot to learn in that department. I never said you would have to bring forth the beast from your inventory, Master. This thing has been with me for a while now, since the time it was supposed to hatch. Ray's emotions were checked, so he was a lot calmer now. Still, he couldn't shake off his confusion. I don't understand. Ader smiled, shrugging as he spoke calmly. The beast is meant to hatch next to its summoner. That is the rule. The egg was transported from wherever it was to your location, same as those phoenixes who did the same in your battle against Dagon. Oh. Ray's eyes widened as he listened to Ader's tale. I managed to contain it before it fully hatched. If you look closely at the egg, you'll see cracks here and there. Ader had been using the darkness to seal the egg and preserve it until Ray woke up. And now that the moment of truth had arrived, it was finally time to leave the rest to the hands of his master. So, I ask you once again, Master. Why are we leaving? Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. I'm sure some of you already had disappointment on your faces as you read the first part of this chapter. Hee hee hee.